Hello guys and welcome to another video. Today we're talking about book tropes. You either love them or you hate them. I feel like there's no middle ground for most. And we're currently living in a world where we're not being sold the plot of a book as much as we are being sold the tropes that exist within that book. So instead of looking at the most popular tropes like insta-love, love triangle, incest, I thought it would be much more interesting to see what your favorite tropes were. So that's exactly what I asked you, and let me tell you guys, you delivered. The first tier we have would be God tier. Here it's called 3 a.m. Those are the kind of book tropes that make you read until your eyes bleed. You cannot put the book down because it's so good. Like, you stay up so late that the sun rises before you even go back to sleep. That's how good that book trope is. The next tier we have is the give it. So this is when someone is telling you about a book and they immediately mention that book trope and you're like, give it to me. I need to have it. I must read it. Give it to me, please. The third tier is sure. This is when you don't mind a book trope, you just don't ever find yourself seeking it out. Next up we have no thanks. This is when you don't hate a book trope, but you rather not read something with that book trope in it. And finally we have turn off. This means that if you find a book with this trope in it, you will not read this book ever. The first book trope you guys recommended was the cool, powerful loner. This specifically goes for male main characters. When there are female characters that are cool and powerful, but also loners, they tend to be described as the first thing that comes to mind is Captain Marvel with this, but there are countless examples. This is kind of giving Katniss Everdeen, is it not? Cool, powerful loner. Even if she doesn't want to be all those things, that's technically what she is. But while I would kind of be okay with this if it's talking about a female main character or a female character, when it comes to the male character, I'm all about that golden retriever energy. Cool, powerful, and loner, it just seems like to me. Which is not to say that you can't be a loner or be a good person, but the fact that it says cool, all my favorite characters have to be at least a little bit lame. So I'm going to say no thanks. Like, I would read a book with this trope in it, but I would prefer it to be like a side trope. Let's not have a cool, powerful loner main character. Or worst of all, love interest. Moving on to the second trope, grumpy ex sunshine. Now this trope, I feel like you either love or you hate. There is absolutely no middle ground. Either you think it's the most revolutionary thing of all time, most purest kind of relationship, or you think it's so bland and so boring and it's been done to death. I'm gonna have to expose myself and say, give it. Give me the grumpy ex sunshine. I am currently rereading Trials of Apollo, and you all know that we have Nico D'Angelo with William Solis, and who doesn't love that kind of dynamic? I feel like sometimes we need a sunshine character to help the grumpy character work through their trauma, and we also need a grumpy character to ground that sunshine character, because the grumpy character understands that the sunshine character sometimes is putting up a front. They're not always as happy as they may seem. So the grumpy character understands that, and they just work really well together. The best example for this dynamic has got to be in Parks and Recreation, and we even got that iconic meme.
Someone will die.
Of fun.
I rest my case. Moving on to enemies to lovers. One of the, if not the most popular trope in fiction ever, or at least in YA or adult romance. Is this healthy? Who knows? But we're not here to therapize our favorite book tropes because this would be a completely different video. I'm not even ready to do that to myself, so I'm not doing that to you either. I'm partial to enemies to lovers when it has more layers. My favorite take on this trope is enemies to begrudging allies, to friends, to lovers. I need there to be a transition. If they are just enemies and they immediately become lovers, then I'll take that as a trashy romance read. I'll accept it in that context. But when I truly love a trope is when it's masterfully applied to like either an urban fantasy or a fantasy, and there I want to see more nuance. I want to see their journey. Are you getting the hints that I love Slowburn? So I want to see the different phases of their relationship. So if we have enemies and then different phases and then lovers, then yes, this is going to keep me awake all night, so I am going to put it in 3 a.m. It just has to be done correctly. I have to say that most times enemies to lovers aren't real enemies. They're just like haters, and usually the guy didn't even hate the girl, he was just in love and he was masking his feelings for some reason under all that hatred and all that rudeness and all that assholery. So I'm not saying I love that take on the trope, but if they're true enemies to lovers and they can actually work out their differences and be on the same team, you know what, that's so great because we love seeing characters having character arcs. So these would be two individuals who are having two individual character arcs, but that work together as one massive character arc for both of them. So it's just so beautiful, and I'm just gonna stop talking about enemies to lovers because I could stay here all day. Moving on to Slowburn. I already spoiled it, but I'm going to put this even in front of enemies to lovers. There is nothing like Slowburn in this world. It was just meant to tear us apart little by little, but also we just grow as people as we read Slowburn. I'm a better person every time I read a Slowburn romance. I love Percy Jackson. What is my favorite ship from there? It's Percy and Annabeth. It's a Slowburn romance that spans over 5 books. It's so good. This probably has to do with the fact that I am a book series girly. Standalones are good, and I feel like that's what I've been reading mostly lately, and I need to get back on my fantasy series shit. They're built different, and they're just so good. If a couple gets together in the first book, it's like, okay, but the whole book is about them getting together, and then we don't get to see them being together. So I want a book series that's around like 4 to 6 books, where the couple kind of gets together maybe in the 3rd book, but then they don't. But then they kiss in the 4th book, but then they don't get together yet. And then they get together in the 5th one, and then you get to explore their established relationship in the 6th one. Please, someone write that for me, or if you've read that, recommend it to me. Give me fantasy series recommendations where there's Slowburn romance. And if you have rivals or haters or enemies to lovers, give me, please, give me. Moving on to Sun x Moon ships. To be quite honest, I don't fully understand how this is different to Grumpy x Sunshine, because I feel like it's the exact same thing. We're looking at the same picture here. So of course, let's ask Reddit, what is the Sun/Moon ship dynamic? Let's see what people have to say. Moon character, usually dark-haired, quiet, serious, reflective. Sun character, usually blonde, upbeat, cheerful, sunshine. We're looking at the same picture. It's an opposites attract type dynamic with some aesthetic qualities needed. Okay, so that's the difference. It needs to be more aesthetic. While I should love this, I have to say I have some baggage in my own life because I was part of a Sun/Moon dynamic, not romantically, just purely platonically for 7 years, which hasn't ended very well, but I was literally the sun and she was the moon, and now I'm like, can I look at that trope without seeing myself in it and seeing how it ended? So I'm just gonna go with sure. I'm gonna put it under Grumpy x Sunshine because I do think that Sun and Moon is more aesthetic than Grumpy and Sunshine. Purely because of that and because of my past trauma, I'm gonna say sure, because it's not a complete turnoff, but I'm not gonna look for it. Next up, we have Black Cat/Golden Retriever friends. Friends being the keyword in this trope. Once again, this also reminds me of my best friend, ex-best friend, so it's kind of a painful memory. I kind of love it. Like, that's why I was in that relationship, because I really liked that we were so opposite and that we felt like very different people, but we also connected a lot. I've never felt myself seen as much by a person as I felt by her. So I'm gonna say give it. Specifically because it's friends. I love friend dynamics in books. I think we need to have more friendship focused books, specifically female friendships. I eat that up. So I'm gonna say give it. I'm a little bit traumatized, so I'm not putting it in 3 a.m. But once again, this is just my own personal trauma. If it's your favorite, then I can 100% understand it, and I wish I were back there with you. Unfortunately, I still need some character development to go back to that place. Next up, we have star-crossed lovers, and obviously 2 couples immediately come to mind. We have Romeo and Juliet, but we also have the much better/healthier, surprisingly, couple, which is Peter Malark and Katniss Everdeen. Star-crossed lovers, to me, screams the lovers of Avatar Season 1. Omashu, that's the thing. Where they're technically enemies to lovers, but they're not enemies because they hate each other. They're enemies because they're born to families or to kingdoms that are at war, and they generally love each other and care for each other almost from the beginning. It's just there are specific circumstances that won't allow them to be together. And honestly, I think that's more boring than enemies to lovers, because I rather have you and your own stupidity prevent you from liking someone and being with them romantically than the world. Because I like character studies better. And you don't really have to change or evolve or have a drastic character arc in order to be star-crossed lovers. in order to be enemies to lovers, there has to be a lot of development on both parts. Both have to change and evolve and then meet in the middle. But in star-crossed lovers, they can start in love and end up in love as well, and the only thing that needs to change is the world around them, which obviously isn't easy, but at the same time, it's not a caricature, so I'm going to go with sure. Yeah, actually, I didn't know I didn't like this until I thought about it. I do love Peeta and Katniss. I almost said their ship name, but I cannot say that on YouTube, or I don't know, but I'd rather not try. But while I love them, I think they are the exception, because they're star-crossed just for the first book and just because of their circumstances. Apart from that, they're just in a fake relationship afterwards. It's so good. This Hunger Games surprisingly has a lot of book tropes. It's the roadmap for every book afterwards. The Hunger Games ran so that everything else could walk. Next up, we have a very controversial one, surprisingly, and that is childhood friends to lovers. Now, this might seem very sweet to some and very boring to other people. Now, my question is Percabeth a childhood friends to lovers? Because they do meet when they're 12, and then they get together when they're 16. I think childhood is supposed to be when you're younger or when you get together when you're older. So I guess Percabeth would be childhood friends to lovers if they had met at 12 and then gotten together at like 21 in college or afterwards. So I'm not sure if I like that. Because if you're childhood friends, what prevents you from being lovers before you're an adult? I don't know, there has to be a very good reason why you don't. And if it's Slowburn, then that's okay, because sometimes things just happen, people change, and then you suddenly see them in a different light, and then you're like, okay, maybe now. But at the same time, I'm like, why does it take them so long?
How long is this going to take?
It's Slowburn if it's over a couple of books, not over a couple of decades. I'm gonna put this in no thanks. I do love puppy love though. Okay, I've convinced myself. I'm gonna put this in short, but it has to be done extremely well or I will be bored. Leave me examples of childhood friends to lovers in the comments below because I'm very interested. I think I'm just confusing myself at this point. Next up, we have found family, and I believe I am 100% correct in saying that this is a 3 a.m. kind of trope. I think found family is one of those tropes that most fandoms or most fans of books agree on. Who doesn't love found family? I guess someone who's just very confident in their own family doesn't like their friends. Just how many people like that can there be? Found family is for those people who you don't necessarily have to have like a bad family experience or dynamic or background. You find your family outside of blood ties, and that is so beautiful. Because to me, several of my friends are literally like my sisters. So they definitely feel like a found family, and you're very proud of that because you found them all on your own and you created something from nothing, and it's just such a beautiful bond to know there's someone outside your family, someone who you just met by pure chance that's gonna be with you through thick and thin and hopefully stay with you for the rest of your life. It's just, I'm not gonna get emotional over a trope, but it's very important and I just love to see it. My 3 a.m. tier is gonna be so chaotic. How can I put found family next to enemies to lovers? One is the purest trope ever in existence, and the other one has the capacity to just be so toxic. But moving on, we have an unlikely duo, which I think is the same thing almost as Grumpy / Sunshine and Black Cat Golden Retriever and Sun / Moon, but in different words. All that being said, I do love an unlikely duo specifically for friendships. And if there's like an age difference, I think that's also very interesting because we don't see a lot of friendships with age differences, and it doesn't even have to just be friendship. It can also be a mentor-mentee relationship, not romantic because I don't like age gaps. But I'm gonna say unlikely duo, I'm gonna put that in 3 a.m. because enemies to lovers is an unlikely duo, right? Once they do start working together, I want everyone to be surprised that they put their bullshit aside to work together for the greater good. Next up, we have A Knight and the Princess. I have to confess that I have read a lot of fan fiction with a knight and a princess, or a knight and a prince, or a princess and a female knight, and all of those combinations are just so good. Specifically because a lot of my favorite ships really fit this dynamic. One of them is very physically strong and more brooding and more reserved, more serious, and also has a very strong moral compass. So the knight, while the other one is a bit more upbeat, more aloof. I don't know if maybe more intelligent, but definitely more of a people person. And sometimes they have a stick up and sometimes they have a very big ego, you know, because they're part of the royalty. For some reason, I really gravitate to that dynamic because I do love opposites attract, so that makes sense. So I'm gonna go with a give it. Give it to me. I do have to say that I probably like this more in fan fiction applied to my already favorite characters than in a book, but I don't think I've ever read this in a book. The closest thing to it would be Art and Gwen are not in love, but neither of them is the guard. If you have a good recommendation for this, please let me know, because I'm actually really interested in seeing something that's actually been published and not just my favorite characters in NAU. Next up we have friends because of shared trauma. Kind of goes hand in hand with found family. Doesn't have to. I'm just gonna put it in give it. Obviously you don't have to have gone through the same thing in your life as someone else in order for there to be a strong bond, and you don't have to have been tortured or held captive alongside someone else in order for them to be like a strong relationship. But it definitely helps. If you've been through the same thing or something very similar as someone else, you definitely have things to talk about. It's easier to empathize and sympathize with the other person, and it's just nice to have someone who has faced the same demons that you have and who has gone through the same shit as you have. So it's very important, just not necessary, because as we know, trauma bonding, it can lead to a good found family, but at the same time, once things calm down, is that relationship going to hold up? And that's why it's not in 3 a.m.
Hope not, because you know, relationships that start under intense circumstances, they never last.
Moving on, we have friends to lovers. Now, I think this is the trope that applies to Percabeth the best. Friends to lovers in a slow burn, but also with a little bit of haters to lovers, at least on Annabeth's side. Because friends to lovers, to me, can be quite boring unless there is bickering involved. Because that's the kind of friendship that I like. I don't like this like a boring relationship. There has to be banter, girly. And obviously for me, friends to lovers, its best version is when it's within a sandwich of other tropes. Like I said before, enemies to begrudging allies to friends to lovers. Yes, I eat that up. But friends to lovers, just that purely, it just doesn't call to me as much. I need other tropes along with it to find it even a little bit appealing. However, I feel like I need to say this, state this loud and clear. I think every single romantic relationship has to have a foundation of friendship for it to work. That's why I hate insta love. If you're friends before, then your relationship is just gonna work out so much better than if there's nothing there. And if your significant other is your best friend, then I think all the better. That being said, friends to lovers, I'm going to go with no thanks, just because I need more garnish. I don't hate it, and I will read books with friends to lovers. It needs to have more things in it. Just by itself, it's a bit boring. No, I need them to clash. Yeah, I just need my characters to clash at least a little bit, because once again, I like an unlikely duo. I like different aesthetics. I like two people to not be completely different, but to be different enough at the beginning where they're not necessarily attracted to each other's personalities. Physically is another thing altogether. But let's move on, because I could stay here and talk about that for hours. The cold exterior melting. I feel like this goes hand in hand with cool, powerful loner. I'm now seeing that I like cool, powerful loner, but just in fanfics, not in my books. But cold exterior melting, I think it's such a nice thing to see, because I love myself a good character arc, especially when it goes together hand in hand with someone else character arc. That's the most beautiful kind of character arc. When two people are growing and evolving, but they do so together or around each other and adapt to each other, and they find a common ground at the end where they're just like, they've both grown as people, they're better for it, and now they can be together. So I'm gonna go with a give it to me, please. This is weird that I put cool, powerful loner in no thanks, but then cold exterior melting, yes. I guess that's the end of the cool, powerful loner character arc. But I just don't like people to be cool. If you're gonna be a powerful loner, at least be lame. At least be an idiot. Cold exterior melting, I'm gonna go with yes. Especially for characters that are more introverted, so they seem more serious even though they can be complete idiots. Moving on to oblivious idiot. And as an oblivious idiot myself, I have to say that I absolutely adore it. Give it to me. 3 a.m. While I also like Idiots in Love, Oblivious Idiots in Love, where it's both of them, that can get a little bit frustrating when they're both so stupid, specifically when they're adult characters, because I'm like, you've lived for over 20 years. You should know by now that this is not how human relationships work. You should know when someone likes you, at least a little bit. Or at least, if you don't know, ask them. Tell them how you feel and, deal with the consequences of that. But when it's just one oblivious idiot and the other one, who's usually like the darker, more serious, introverted one, just has the patience to deal with them because they love them so much, then yes, that is what I love. I'm exposing my favorite dynamics so hard right now. Let's move on to badass loner MC, which obviously goes hand in hand and is basically the same thing as cool, powerful loner. I'm going to put this into no thanks. No, actually, I'm gonna put this into turn off because cool, powerful loner isn't necessarily the main character. I am not necessarily a people person, but I'm also not a loner. I'm somewhere in between. I like my people and I like them a lot. I just need my me time sometimes, a lot of the times. I can kind of see it and I can get behind it if it's done very well. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about Keith from Voltron. Thoughts be gone. Give me real book characters, and I can't think of any of them that I like being badass loners. Unless we're talking about Katniss, but that's something else altogether. I'm imagining this as a purely male trope. I think if it were a female trope, maybe it would be different for me. But for now, since no good characters that have that trope come to mind, I'm washing my hands and I'm putting this in turn off. Next up, we have gay enemies to lovers, because apparently that's different from normal enemies to lovers. Who am I to say that gay enemies to lovers isn't also a 3 a.m. worthy kind of trope? I'm gonna put it next to the normal, or I guess the hetero, straight enemies to lovers. To me, they're the same thing. I'll take enemies to lovers in any format, color, gender that you want to give me. I don't think there's anything more to say about this. Fake dating. And this is another one of those tropes where I eat that up. Most used quote of this video in fanfic, but in real published books, I'm like, because in fanfic, I have more suspension of disbelief. I cannot apply the same level of suspension and disbelief in a book as I can in fanfic. Because in fanfic, obviously, it makes sense that rivals to lovers or enemies to lovers would, for some reason, have to have a fake relationship where they both inevitably fall in love. But in a real life situation that they're trying to present to me in a book, does it make sense for two people to start fake dating? Tell me, how many people in real life do you know that have had a fake relationship? Because I know exactly zero. And I hear you being like, well, I haven't met anyone who's gone through any of these tropes, but I do know people with found family. I do know unlikely duos. I do know oblivious idiots. Grumpy X Sunshine, we've talked about that. There are some of these that apply to real life. They're tropes because they happen in real life, Art imitates life, life imitates art. But I have never even heard of people who had fake dated. But there's so many movies and so many books about it. I am just a little bit saturated with that trope. Specifically because it's such an unbelievable thing to happen. So I'm just gonna go with no thanks, or sure. I'm gonna go with no thanks. It would be funny though if it wasn't between the main relationship. If it's fake dating of like side characters, I would love that. And specifically if it's a comedy, then give it to me. But if it's the main relationship and they have to fake date, then no thanks. Without knowing the plot, I'm just gonna go with no, straight up. Next up, we have vampires versus werewolves. Now this is a versus, so it's like the Twilight thing. It's not vampires or werewolves, it's versus. And to that, I'm going to say another quick no thanks. And I am thinking about Twilight, but I'm also thinking about Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Maybe you know my relationship to this author, maybe you don't. So I'll enlighten you. I saw the hype for her on TikTok with The Love Hypothesis, and I was like, I'm going to read this book and I'm gonna hate it. And I was completely right. It was a wild ride of a book, like trashy but entertaining. Somehow very funny, but just like not good quality plot or characters or anything else. So afterwards I was like, okay, I'll read the next one. And then I read it and it was the same experience. And when I read the synopsis to Bride, I was like, I need to read this because this is literally a fan fiction. I can't believe it's being published. And when I opened it and when I read the first page, I was like, geez, this cannot be. And I read it and I was flabbergasted throughout the whole book. All that being said, I read it in 2 days, basically one sitting. It was very surprisingly funny and witty, but also very stupid and trashy and terrible, and it had all the tropes that should just stay in fact fiction for the love of God. So that's why it's going into no thanks, because of Ali Hazelwood. Next up, we have the power of friendship. And while I love friends and friends groups and found families, I'm like, the power of friendship just seems like a cop-out looking at you, Magnus Chase and the Ship of the Dead. But at the same time, I'm gonna be like, sure, because it's not a huge turnoff for me. It seems like a cop-out, sure, but if done well, I think it could be enjoyable. I just haven't found one where it's truly believable that that's how they win. When we're not talking about cartoons meant for children, of course. We all know that the real treasure are the friends that we made along the way. Next up, we have coming of age, which definitely goes straight into 3 a.m. or Give It. I don't know. The thing with coming of age is that it can be quite painful because it literally is about you growing and evolving. And in order to grow, there has to be at least some pain involved, because change involves pain, at least in some capacity. It doesn't feel right to have it after cold exterior melting. I've convinced myself, as I tend to do in these videos, I'm gonna put it in 3 a.m. Coming of age can be such a beautiful thing. Someone maturing, realizing the true potential, just finding out who they are or who they want to be can be such a powerful thing. So I'm gonna put it in 3 a.m. I was talking about this with my friends the other day. Coming of age can happen at any age. So whether that is in your childhood, in your adolescence, or in your young adult years, or maybe your midlife crisis is your final coming of age. Until your 30s, you're constantly growing and evolving and learning who you are and relearning who you are. So I feel like that's a trope that can apply to very different age groups, and I want to see more from it. We have happy ending, and obviously that goes straight into 3 a.m. because if I stay up until 6 a.m. reading, I do not want to get a bad ending or an unhappy ending. I don't necessarily hate stories that don't have a happy ending, looking at you, La La Land, but also if I've spent over 6 hours reading a book, then I want a satisfying ending. And for me, that usually is a happy ending. It doesn't all have to be happy, okay? I don't live in dream world. I know things just sometimes don't end up how you want them to end it up, but I want the basis of that book to have a happy ending. So if it's about a character, I want that character to at least be in a good place where they can move on. If it's about two characters, then I want them to be together, and if it was about their bad relationship, then I want them to be separate and be happy as individuals. I want them to be happy, but within limit, of course. It doesn't have to be like they won the lottery and everything is okay and perfect in their lives. Moving on to forced proximity. This is one that I love in fan fiction, and I also love in actual books, but I'm just gonna put it in Give It so it can be a little bit more balanced. Forced proximity is such a fun trope to have. It usually happens a lot in like offices where you work together. Like if it's a summer camp, it's also forced proximity because you are in like a bubble, but you have to be together all day long. And that just leads to a lot of interactions and a lot of fun interactions. And it works so well when your characters are in different headspace or having a disagreement or just don't like each other. Forced proximity forces them to actually communicate and have shared experiences, and without forced proximity, some couples would not get together ever. So sometimes it's like the little push that they need. By the way, I'm sorry about the noise. There's just construction in front of my house and right next to my house, and I feel like the construction workers have a personal vendetta against me. Every time I sit down to film, they just start drilling. Let's get on with this before they start drilling again. Next up, we have fake dating, and oh my god, that one's on here twice. Fated mates. If you're saying fated mates as in reproductive mates, then I hate that.
I just want a mate.
You just want to mate?
I just want a mate.
You're not mating with me, sunshine.
A mate. I want a mate.
That is a complete turnoff, and I feel like that's what it is. Because why wouldn't you say soulmates? And I also have a problem with the concept of a soulmate because I don't so much believe in fate. So like you make your own fate and your own decisions. You don't have a soulmate. You just have your other half. If anything, you have a person, I don't know, who's very important to you, but I don't think you're destined to be with them. I think you just happen to be with them, and it's the biggest, greatest coincidence of the whole universe. Like you're so lucky that you found them, but you weren't predestined to be with them. It's a cosmic accident, and that's the beauty of it. So I'm just gonna go with no for fated mates, specifically if it's for reproductive mates, because I do not like where that is going. Next up, we have amnesia, which is a trope that I've been seeing a lot in my fanfiction lately, specifically for the ship between Andrew and Neil from the Foxhole Court, which really surprised me, but with them, it just works really well. Inside a book, however, I'm going to go with no thanks, because I think it's kind of a boring trope, especially if you're reading from the point of view of the person with amnesia. Who are they? They don't know themselves, but we're supposed to like them as a character. They're no one. They are a blank slate. And if it's like amnesia to create conflicts between characters that are in love, then that just feels cheap. Because does that happen? Is amnesia as common as the media is making us think that it is? I don't think so. We have 4 left, and the next one is Rivals. I have to be honest, I put this one myself because it's my favorite. So Rivals is going straight behind Slowburn. It edges the line between enemies to lovers and friends to lovers. The sweet spot between that is Rivals. Also haters to lovers, because Rivals, you have 2 people who are at the same level. Whatever level that might be, or whatever category or field that might be in, they are equals. That's so necessary to me in a ship, having 2 characters just be equals, be on the same footing, just being able to compete between them. I'm just a very competitive person, so I love when my ships are competitive. They also share this very big thing in their life because they're rivals because of something. Maybe they are co-workers, maybe they both work in the same industry, maybe they're just rivals intellectually in school to get the best grades. It does it for me because they have a lot in common, but they both want to win so badly, but they push each other to be better, and they just keep wanting to be better together and individually. I'm not gonna sit here and explain myself because this trope is basically perfection. And you can have friends who are rivals, so that's the edge that to me is lacking in normal friends to lovers. 3 left, let's go. We have secret identity, and the first thing that comes to mind, unfortunately, is Miraculous Ladybug, which leads to a love square because they both have secret identities. It's so messy. It also reminds me of that Marissa Mayer book. It's called Renegades, and they're superheroes, so obviously they have secret identities, and they're in love when they're in their civilian identities, but when they're superheroes, they hate each other. So it's very complicated, very messy. And because of that, I'm gonna put it in sure, because if done correctly, like in Renegades, it can be very interesting. And it also shows you that people aren't perfect, and you don't have to like 100% of a person to like them, because there's different aspects to their personalities, and some of them you might not know about. But then you find out about them, you love them regardless, and you learn to love them for who they are as a whole. And that also goes with a little bit with enemies to lovers for me, because it's so beautiful to think about someone who has seen you at your worst, who has hated you because of your worst qualities, but can overlook that and focus on the best parts of you, who can see the very, very darkest bits of you and still love you. I am not ready to be therapized, so do not even. Next up, we have arranged marriage, which it's not a turnoff. It can actually be a fun plot device to get 2 characters together, so I'm gonna put it in sure. I haven't seen many of them specifically in contemporary fiction. I guess this would be more historical, or depending on what cultures you're reading from, or fantasy. I'm open to the idea of it, but I haven't read that much from it. And lastly, we have Road Trip, which to me goes into 3 a.m. or I'm gonna put it in Give It, because there's a lot of them on 3 a.m. It feels a lot like reading a movie when you're reading something of a road trip, and it's so visual, it's so fun to get to see all these different settings and how different characters interact in the different settings. I am thinking about Percy Jackson, because the first 4 books, or at least the first 3 books, are road trips, and they're so fun. That's it. Am I right in all of these? Okay, I'm gonna put Star-Crossed Lovers in no thanks, and I'm going to put vampires and werewolves in turn off, just to have a little bit more balance. And also, I'm gonna put A Knight and a Princess in sure, because I haven't read from it, and it's just fan fiction. And today we're doing book tropes, not fanfic tropes, which are 2 different things, once again, because of my ability to suspend my disbelief. But that is it. Thank you guys so much for sending in your favorite book tropes. I guess all there is to say is that if you want to participate in my videos like this, make sure to subscribe and click that bell button so you get notifications anytime I post videos, but also anytime I post on my community page and ask you guys for help with videos. Please leave a like if you haven't already and comment down below which one was your favorite, and if your favorite one wasn't featured in this video. Let me know down below. I'm very interested because I feel like we covered quite a bit of them. I post videos just like this every single Friday, and I guess I'll see you guys next time. Bye!